With the completion of the Democratic National Convention on Friday, most American public and certainly the mainstream media are going to be laser focused between now and November 5th, trying to discover who's going to be the next president of the United States. Many people are going to try to convince you it's one candidate or another, but everyone's going to be focused on the domestic front in the United States for the foreseeable future. But off the front pages, off the primary focus of what Americans are doing, in a number of quarters around the world, there are growing dark clouds which have very ominous implications for American national security and for global security. We are entering into a period, and in fact, we are in it now, to where there is a significant possibility of the United States being drawn into a major war, and if things don't go well, could be a series of wars that could strap us for everything and possibly even turn into a global conflict. Now, I know a lot of people have been saying a lot of those kinds of things for a while, and unfortunately, it kind of gets lost in the background noise. And people say, oh, World War III this, World War III that, and then people don't much pay attention. But folks, we need to start paying attention right now, because depending on what the United States does and how it handles a number of very potentially volatile situations, we could find ourselves unwittingly drawn into a war. Now, this is currently the Biden administration has the reins right now, so the responsibility falls primarily on them. But this is stuff that has been building in many cases for many years before Biden ever came into office. So this is an American problem. And especially if war breaks out, it's not going to matter what your political affiliation is. It's going to potentially harm everyone. And anytime a genuine war starts, it always has the possibility of taking on a life of its own and can't be controlled by anybody. I'm always reminded how World War I, number one, should never have been fought. And for those who may not know, it of course, it started with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But what many people don't know today is that was, at the time it happened, considered a local and possibly regional issue that didn't have much implication to anybody else in the world, didn't affect anything really going on in Europe, because political assassinations were not uncommon at that time. But what made it a problem is that there were forces behind the scenes in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and in Serbia, and then in some of their allies, who were looking for some kind of an opportunity to get back at each other. And so they took advantage of this opportunity, and then it just started this cascading series of events, and then it started drawing everyone in together. And then you had the major powers who had no interest in fighting a war, all of a sudden got sucked into it because of a series of events that everyone lost control over. And that's not unique in world history, and certainly it could happen again here. So I'm going to show you a little bit today about what actually is at stake here, and what the risks are, and what we need to be careful about doing, and what we need to not do. Now, it's not going to matter right now whether Kamala Harris, who won the Democratic, or who was basically crowned as the Democratic nominee officially on Friday, or whether it's Donald Trump, who was already named the Republican nominee. We could talk about their foreign policy issues, and there are some similarities, there are some differences, but really there's not a whole lot of difference in any American foreign policy. It hasn't mattered much who the president has been for really almost, you can go back since 9/11 and possibly even before that. Some call it the uniparty. And when it comes to foreign policy, there's nuanced differences between them. But, you've seen it hasn't much mattered. Donald Trump did some of the same things that Obama did. And Biden has done some of the same things that Trump has done. You see this deployments over and all. You saw nobody was willing to get out of Iraq. None of the presidents were willing to get out of Afghanistan until Biden finally did. But now you see that Obama got us into Syria. Trump talked about getting out of Syria, but then didn't. Biden has done nothing about it. Hasn't had any interest in doing anything but maintaining the status quo. So you see, there's not a whole lot of difference between there. But here's what you need to understand about where the risks are, and there are a number of them. So in the Middle East right now, we're waiting with bated breath to find out what's going to happen, because there is a potential triggering event that we're waiting to find out what's going to happen. And that is, I think at the end of July, when Israel assassinated actually a couple of different leaders. One, the chief negotiator for the Hamas side in Tehran during their presidential inauguration. So that was a big deal. Israel had previously destroyed an embassy compound in Damascus against Iran, one of their Iranian embassies. building. And so that's just been building up pressure. And now then we're waiting to find out what's going to happen now. I've been told by some people who have contacts in Iran that they say that a response is definitely coming. That there hasn't been one so far. And some people are actually speculating, well, maybe there won't be one. Maybe we'll be fine. And maybe some American diplomacy trying to make some kind of a deal between Israel and Hamas will offload that. I see no chance it's going to happen. Just imagine if the United States during a presidential inauguration, someone assassinated one of their political opponents in Washington that had been an invited guest of the United States. What do you think the possibilities are that we would say, well, I know we should retaliate, but it would be better for another country if we didn't. No one's going to do that. We would never do that, and it's not likely that Iran is either. You can try to make the case that, well, Iran is much weaker than the United States, so they have different sets of rules imposed on them in reality. But you have the situation, look at where it's been and what the context of the things that have been happening. And especially you go back to that, really, you can even go back to the assassination of Soleimani by Trump in I think it was January of 2020, then the destruction of the embassy, and now this. And so Iran, I think, and from what I'm told, they feel like they have to reestablish some kind of a baseline, and they think that if they don't make a big response this time or bigger, that they're going to continue to be subjected to these kinds of attacks. And so they feel they have to do something. We'll see. It hasn't happened as of the time we're making this show here, but it's likely. It's probably going to come. And here's the problem, the compounding problem for the United States. In the most likely scenario is that that's exactly what Israel wants. That Benjamin Netanyahu has been trying to prod the United States into an attack on Iran for quite a long time, that he wants to, quote, solve the problem with Iran once and for all. They think that there's not going to be a better chance, so they want to spawn some kind of war. They want to do whatever they can to make it look like Iran started it so that we'll have to go in and join it, etc. So whatever Iran does in retaliation, they will try to thread the needle to say, we're going to respond to what it is, but it's not going to be a huge one, that necessitates an even bigger Israeli counterstrike. But I think that it's not going to matter what Iran wants to do or what kind of needles they think they're threading. I think that no matter what they do, even if it was milder than they did after the embassy attack, I think that Israel is going to use that as the cause to have an even bigger and more direct attack into Iran, because, Netanyahu, there's, in my view, no chance that he's going to take an attack by Iran onto any kind of Israeli territory, especially if anybody is killed, and do nothing. So the likelihood is that Iran is going to do something, Israel is going to do something before, and there comes your real decision-making for the United States. Do we get drawn into a war? Or do we finally tell Israel, do not go beyond this point because we are not going to fight for you? That's my big worry, is that we don't even have that capacity. The leadership in the United States, whether that's in the White House, in Congress, the House of Representatives, the Senate, certainly lots of well-known political figures, former military figures who like to go on television all the time, who go on social media, write articles. They are lusting for this, and a lot of them want it. They may get it, and let's just take a look at what that ramification means here, because this is a relatively recent deployment map of the United States. There's somewhere around 50,000 troops plus or minus at any given time, and you see we're literally all over the Middle East in all these different places. One of the big problems, especially with those in Syria and Iraq, is they're just kind of scattered out to the winds. And if Iran gets into a war with the United States, if it goes from just a tit-for-tat response to an actual war, let's say that Israel gets its wish and that there is now a war declared between the two, and we have the choice of either joining in with the war, which, by the way, Secretary of State Blinken, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin have both said, yes, if that happens, if there's an attack, we will fight for Israel. So the likelihood is, and what we have said, is that that's what's going to happen. So this map shows you, some of the vulnerability of the United States, because those troops in Iraq, those troops in Syria especially, they've been subjected to some of these so-called axis of resistance forces, the militia that are spread throughout the area that are aligned with Iran and supported to one degree or another by them. they have been attacking those places for a long time. And most of the time, like 90%, maybe more than that, don't actually kill or wound any Americans because they're intercepted and shot down. In a war situation, though, where it's not just some faction that's sitting out in the middle of the desert, but an actual state of Israel, they have the capacity militarily to penetrate any of our defenses, and they could actually cause huge damage to our forces. Now, of course, if any Americans are killed in large number by another state, then that's going to cause, I mean, even if we didn't want to join a war, that's what we're going to end up doing. So this could get us plunged into a war. And then you have all kinds of competing problems here, because you have with Iran, you've had a lot of interaction between Iran and Russia of late. A lot of reports have that Russia has been giving them some of the better air defense systems, so that some of the retaliation by the Israel and the United States, if we get into a war, might not succeed to hit some of the targets that they want. The Russians may well be giving Iran ammunition, other missiles, some of their Iskanders, perhaps, some of their other hypersonics that neither the United States nor Israel can defend against. So this could get really ugly really fast. And then you have the additional problem that Israel also has been threatening to go into southern Lebanon against Hezbollah. Well, you have a number of elements and figures in the region that are saying if that happens, if Israel goes into a full-on fight with Hezbollah, then they may join into the fight against Israel. Most notably, Turkey. NATO ally Turkey has said if Israel attacks into southern Lebanon, that they will no longer stand on the sidelines. Now, I can't say whether that would happen, whether it wouldn't, but the very real possibility is that they may. And then you've got the whole possibility of the entire area just being engulfed into a fight. And I am here to tell you, if this is all there was, if this is the only thing we had to worry about, it would be a huge issue, because you thought the war in Iraq was bad, especially from 2003 to 2007. It's nothing compared to what we would suffer if we got into an actual war with Iran, because what would you do? Fire some missiles in there. Yeah, great. And then what? I mean, we've seen that missiles have been firing back and forth between Russia and Ukraine for 2.5 years, and that hasn't caused either side to capitulate. Does anybody think that you're going to fire some missiles into Iran and that's somehow going to end? That Iran is going to capitulate with no forces going on the ground? And folks, let me just tell you, we don't have an army, a ground force anymore that could go in and go to war against Iran. It doesn't exist. There's less than 500,000 total forces in the United States Army on active duty right now. Just to put that in context, there are somewhere around 600,000 active fighters of the Russian Federation on Ukrainian territory in that one strip of land there you see that's separating the two. That's on the ground here. And of our fighters, that's our global deployment, by the way. That's in all the different regions of the world that we have. A lot of them, they're scattered from Europe to the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific area, United States. I mean, they're literally scattered to the four winds. And of that less than 500,000, there might be 80 to 100,000 actually combat troops. All the rest of that is to support the main force and to support the infrastructure and all that, supplies, the training cycles, et cetera, all that. We don't have a ground army that we could deploy anywhere, and it would take us months to do. So you could literally get the entirety of our ground forces sucked into a war there, and they would not be able to succeed. Not for a long time. You would have to massively expand the size of the U.S. Army to do that. And why would we want to? I mean, it's absurd to even say out loud, but you need to hear this. This is what our leaders need to understand. If you start a war, these are the dilemmas you're faced with in this one area. And I'm about to show you there's two others to worry about. Because why would you want to devote the bulk of all of your ground combat area into one area that has no strategic interest for our country? We have no interest in dominating or ruling or anything else Iran. We have seen since 1979, they're a nuisance, but it's something that we can handle easily, and it has no real impact on anything we do. It has no impact on our interest in the Middle East or anywhere else that we haven't been able to handle easily and can continue to do so indefinitely, without having to do anything else, without having to go to a war. So why would you risk getting sucked into a war that can only have consequence and costs for you both on the location and elsewhere? And if you say, well, we wouldn't send ground forces, really? So you're going to fight a war with somebody, and then what are you going to do? How are you going to win it? Without ground forces, without somebody to take and hold terrain, to compel political capitulation, if that's what you wanted to do. If you have this this fantasy that we would just send enough bombs and enough missiles, then they'll give in. They won't. They won't. They won't. Get that out of your head. Look at the Houthis. The Houthis have been fighting for I don't even know, a year, 15 years, maybe 10 years. I can't remember the number right offhand, against the Saudi Arabia, which we've supported. So all the way back to the Obama administration. They never capitulated. Saudi Arabia, with all of their technology and all of the U.S. provided weapons, was never able to cow them. We haven't been able to cow them since we started firing weapons and attacking them in the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. So if you think that the Houthis are going to keep fighting, what do you think about this huge country of Iran that probably does have, or not probably, does have and could expand support from Russia, who would be only too happy to be another thorn in the side of the United States, suck us in and keep us sucked in there? You see where this is going, right? There's no good options here. You either plunge a ground force into a fight that will kill thousands of Americans thousands of miles away from here, and something that has nothing to do with our national security, which would be a political loser, or you don't send in the force, and then the war can never be won, and you're just constantly just firing missiles back there in a war that doesn't even have a prospect of ending. But it'll continue to cause all kinds of problems anywhere else, especially if Iran ends up closing the Strait of Hormuz, and then the price of oil skyrockets globally, which would have catastrophic impact on our own economy. You see, there are no good answers for this. There's no good path. Why are we even toying around the edge of this? By all rights, we should be telling Israel, do not start a war with Iran. If you do, you are on your own. We're not going to help you. We're not going to participate, because it would be harmful for you, and it would be potentially catastrophic for us, and we're not going to do it. That's what we ought to be doing right now, and we ought to be saying so publicly. Y'all figure this stuff out. Y'all come to some kind of an agreement, but you're on your own. You guys have to figure this out. We'll provide any diplomatic help, but we're not going to get into either one of your fight. If y'all come to blows, you're on your own. That's exactly what we should say, because Iran will never be able to invade Israel. I mean, you have, number one, Iraq in between, but they don't have Iran doesn't have the capacity to project power anywhere. They can be annoyance and a nuisance, and they can fire missiles, and they can be very lethal in some of that, but they can't do anything to Israel that Israel couldn't do 10 times more over to Iran. So if they want to get into a fight, which would be stupid and catastrophic and destructive for both sides, they're sovereign nations. They can do whatever they want, but we're supposed to be a sovereign nation ourselves, and we also have agency, and we should be unequivocal in saying it is in no way interest of the United States. We will not fight a pointless war because you guys can't get along. That's between y'all, because the cost to us could be so great. That's one. The second one is, let's see. Let's go first of all next to Russia, because that's the next thing we're waiting on. Because a couple of months back, the United States and then the West gave permission to the Ukraine side to use their weapons inside Russia. There'd been kind of a taboo on that up to that point. But finally, they said, yeah, actually, you can use it. You can use it in the tactical area, in the north around Kharkiv or something like that, north of into the border of the Russian side. But now then, Ukraine has physically invaded in the Kursk area. They may be trying to expand it into some other areas. Now that the fighting is happening on Russian soil. For the first time since 1941, another nation has attacked and invaded Russia, with all the ramifications you might expect in the reaction from the Russian side. They're very angry, and they are preparing, according to their president yesterday, a significant response. We haven't seen it yet, but it's self-evident that it definitely will come. So we're waiting to find out what that is. What is that going to look like? Putin said yesterday, everyone who was responsible for that cursed attack is going to pay. They never specified what they meant. We have to wait and find out, because it is possible that whatever they do could end up drawing us into a war. That's been my concern from the day one, and one of the reasons why it is obviously in America's self-interest, in the NATO alliance's interest, to get this war over with as quickly as possible. There is no prospect, zero, that Ukraine will ever be able to mount an offensive capacity on a conventional level that can drive Russia out, that won't itself result in an escalation to nuclear weapons. There is no possibility, none, that Vladimir Putin would allow his forces to get kicked out of the area that they've been in since 2022 and him not resort to nuclear weapons. We already know, because of some leaked information and actually some reporting by, I believe the guy's name is Shudo for CNN, that in late 2022, Russia was close to using nuclear weapons because they had suffered a local setback in the Kherson and Kharkiv regions. They didn't go to it then. They were able to solve it other ways. But apparently there was a legitimate possibility of escalation to tactical nuclear weapons then. And that was a small setback. If now then something should change the dynamics on the ground, and they were being driven out of this territory, then it stands to reason that this would go to nuclear weapons. Bigger point, though, more likelihood is it will never get to that point, because Russia has been expanding its ground forces, expanding its air power, its air defense, its drone capability, its electronic warfare, and certainly its industrial capacity. They have been growing their army. They've been bringing more people in. And now then the chances are growing that they will have the military conventional capacity to conquer more of Ukraine over time. They are going much slower than any Western mentality ever would, or the way we have done war, the way wars have been done in the past, but they are still methodically moving, and there is nothing that shows that that's going to stop anytime soon. And we could have a collapse of the front in the east at any time here, because the Ukraine side is really suffering more. If Russia does something bigger here as a response to this Kursk, then that could actually hasten potentially a collapse. What is the United States going to do? What is NATO going to do? What is Europe going to do if after all of these things that we have done, Ukraine actually loses and Russia wins? Can you imagine us saying, stand on the sidelines and doing nothing? That's what we should do. Well, the wisdom would be to do exactly that and say, we're just going to solidify the lines at the eastern flank of NATO. People can, start looking after their national self-interest, especially those border countries, raise their defense spending, make their militaries more robust so that Russia will never think about attacking them. That's what we should be doing, and ending the war so that we end the possibility that those defenses are ever needed. That's what wisdom would do. We don't have a lot of wisdom in any Western capital these days, and lots of foolish ones that risk taking a bad situation and making it worse by having bad responses to them. That's one of the things I worry about. We'll see how that works out over time. But that is something we're waiting on. So the next thing, we're waiting to find out what Russia is going to do. We don't know at this point. That's two. The third one here I want to go is in the Indo-Pacific area. We've seen some headlines like some of these in recent months, where some Americans and some admirals in the U.S. military are saying that they think that China is just going to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. So we need to start building up our power. We keep doing things like this one here. I think this was yesterday, I think. Yeah, this was yesterday's headlines. So this is very fresh. Again, this is normal thing. They call it a freedom of navigation operation. We send a destroyer through the Taiwan Straits as China continues to step up its incursions around Taiwan and continues its threatening rhetoric. We keep sending our ships through there. And look, and especially when you look at how this is set up here, you say this is a setup of how the U.S. armed forces are spread throughout the Indo-Pacific. And you see we've got them everywhere. This is why earlier I told you we had basically spread to the four winds all of our troops over, and our whole army is less than 500,000. And you see that the Marines are not very big anyway. I think they're probably about 50,000 actual fighters. And then you've also got the Army National Guards, who has some forces in the region anyway. Obviously the Air Force and the Navy are heavy players in this area as well. But they're spread to the four winds here. And we've got stuff also in the Air Force and the Navy in the Middle East. We've also got some at home, etc. If we should ever get sucked into a war here, let me just explain to you something. Forget about, chest beating and flag waving and all this kind of stuff and how great we are and we're the greatest power in the history of the world. Like Biden has said many times, and we played several times here, they believe that. They are wrong. We are not an unlimited power. We are not the greatest power in the history of the world at this point. We are a major power. We have significant economic and military power, significant diplomatic power, if it's used properly. But because of the other nations are starting to rise, that comparative balance is shifting, and others are now capable. Others have agency. And especially if you're talking about going into their neighborhood, and this is the worst one of all, if we go into the Asia Pacific area and we do what Biden said, I think 4 times in his administration so far, at one point said we would fight to defend Taiwan if it gets into a war with China. We should not do that. We should never do that. And I'll tell you the flat reason why, because we can't. We have enough weapons, and there's been a number of computer simulations done on this. Lots of has been written on it. We've talked about it here a lot. If we got into an actual shooting war with China, we could inflict significant damage on them. No question about it. We could harm them a great deal. But we don't have the ability to sustain combat. So our air defense missiles, our interceptors, our offensive missiles, our air power, our other sea power, all of that would run out of ammunition within a month. In some categories, even within days, because what we have, we're not set up for sustaining long-term fighting. China is. We would be in their backyard, in some cases, really in their front yard, frankly. And so all of their industrial capacity, they can have ground-based missiles flying from all over the place. We wouldn't. We're exclusively limited to what we can do in the air, on the sea, and under the sea. And those are significantly limited. We could get into a war to where we could literally see our entire Pacific fleet sunk. Anything we would send within range of the Chinese mainland, we could lose all of it. And some simulations have shown exactly that. I remember there was one simulation, I believe it was CSIS a couple of years back, that said in the worst case scenario, there were 700 American aircraft that were destroyed in this. And it's ironic because they said that, but that still prevented China from having a complete victory in 30 days. That they didn't look beyond that, which is absurd because wars aren't fought in 30 days, as the Russia-Ukraine war should now make clear to everyone. But if we start and we go down that path, you see, we cannot win. China has all the resources, and if they make this effort, they're going to understand that they're going to pay a price, but they won't stop until they succeed with their 1.4 billion people and their massive army, and especially their missile force. We cannot match it. I don't care how proud you are to be an American and how proud you are of the U.S. Air Force and Navy and Army and Marines and all that, Coast Guard. We cannot win a war there. We should never fight it. We should be very clear to the authorities in Taiwan. We should tell them straight up, don't go to war with China. Don't press them in an area because we won't and we can't come to your defense. Otherwise, we'll cripple our entire armed forces and now put our own security around the world at risk. That's how serious it would be in that one. But that's the third of the major storm clouds that you see floating all around. And unfortunately, I don't see our leaders doing the wise thing in any of these 3 major areas. So while everybody's focused on whether it's going to be Commander-in-Chief Kamala Harris or Commander-in-Chief Donald Trump, their foreign policies aren't a whole lot different than that, because it's the elite, really, of the U.S. Diplomatic Corps, the State Department, the Pentagon, Department of Defense, et cetera. Those don't change that much right now. And nobody in the White House has been much different, just some nuances here and there. So this is something that we all need to understand the risk for. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, they both need to sober up and recognize that we are in grave danger. If you get into any one of these conflicts, it could have catastrophic implications for our national security everywhere. If you should somehow get sucked into all 3, you don't have to be a genius to figure out, if we can't handle one, we damn sure can't handle 3, and the loss to us could be irrecoverable. It is not out of realm of possibility that the United States could be defeated in a war. And that's one that doesn't even go nuclear, because if it goes nuclear, everybody loses. There would be no winners. But in a conventional war, it would be possible for us to be defeated. Now, you never hear that with anybody in running for political office. They always talk about how great we are and how, we're the most amazing military power, et cetera. We have a great military power. And as long as we don't squander it, it can be used for its primary intended purpose, which is the defense of the United States. We have a military that if we don't choose battles that we can't win anywhere, we do have a strong enough so that if anyone does decide to attack us, then we can cause them that force such pain and cost that they should be deterred from doing so, because they see that they might not be able to win it if they attack us. But if we do the opposite and either stumble into a war from stupidity or choose one that's big, that's not like some Iraq or Taliban situation in Afghanistan where, the other side is basically bound to foot, and they don't have Air Force defenses and satellites and all that kind of stuff, don't have any nuclear weapons for sure. We can fight that one, and even when we lose it, it didn't have any cost. You fight one of these wars, this is a different ballgame entirely. This could cost us gravely and in ways we may never recover from. Let's don't find out. Let's don't go there. But it's important that you understand what's going on. We need to sober up. And while it's important to figure out who's going to be the next commander in chief, no matter who that is, we need to make sure they understand the cost to us. And we need to significantly change our appetite, if you will, about our foreign policy and focus more on the things that we can successfully do to make sure we stay safe and free and have the ability to economically prosper, which can continue on indefinitely. If we're wise, that doesn't have to change. And if we're not, you know where that could lead. That's your deep dive for today. Thanks a lot for joining us. Always appreciate it. Always grateful to have you guys on there. And we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.